You know, there's an old saying that time flies when you're having fun. Well, that's certainly true, isn't it? Go on vacation, you're gone for 2 weeks, and it seems like it was a few days. And I've been hanging around here for 30 years, and it just doesn't seem like it. Time has time has certainly flown. I know while time flies that way, I know also that when in your church sometimes it just seems to drag by, doesn't it? I mean, the 35 minutes or so. At least that was true for me when I was growing up. A kid, you could spend hours playing, and then you go to church, and sometimes it seems like, oh, I didn't have a watch back then. But I have had Linda and I have had the time of our lives. We have loved this church and this ministry, and the fortunate thing for us is we don't have to move. We're still going to be a part of the church. We will be gone for a while, but that's a very, very good thing. I want to pray and then just share some thoughts with you that God has laid on my heart. God, thanks for this time to worship, and now this time to just reflect on your word and some principles and truths that I think are so important for us. Thank you for these people, this church, the leaders of this body who have provided such clear direction. The elders and staff, board of directors, all of these people have had such a significant impact. May you bless them. And I pray that you would speak in these next few moments. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. Those of you who know me well know that I have been a fan of Ronald Reagan for years. When people come to town, I ask them, well, do you want to go to the Reagan Library? And I take them regularly. But I love one of the stories that he told. Peggy Noonan, in her book on Ronald Reagan, said that this was one of his favorite. And it was about a guy who was driving down a country road. He was going about 50 miles an hour, just enjoying the scenery, when he looked out the side window and looked down, and he saw this chicken running alongside the car, keeping pace with the car. And it just like shocked him. He couldn't believe he'd never seen anything like that in his life. And about that time, the chicken actually sped up and cut in front of the car, and then took off like a bullet and ran down this side road towards this farmhouse. And this guy was so curious that he decided to follow the chicken. And he turned down the road, and he saw this old farmer sitting there in a chair. And he got out of the car. He said, "Sir, did a chicken run down this road and pass you?" And he said, "Yep, he sure did." And he said, "Well, you know, when he was running beside me, it looked like that chicken had 3 legs. Did it?" And the old farmer said, "Yep, sure did." And he said, "Well, how'd that happen?" He said, "Well, I breed them that way." He said, "For years, me and Mama and my son, every time we had chicken, we'd get in this big argument about who's going to get the drumsticks. And I just got tired of the fighting all the time. And so I decided to breed these chickens." And he said, "Well, what does it taste like?" And he said, "Honestly, I can't tell you. I've never been able to catch one of those suckers." This really is a cute story, but I share the story because it really is a picture of some of our lives. We get so busy, running so fast, doing so many things, that we seldom, it seems to me, have an opportunity or take an opportunity to just stop and reflect upon our own lives, where we are, where we're going, what God's plan for our lives might be. And that's especially true when we get involved in ministry. And those of you who are in ministry and still have a career and that kind of a thing, it's really easy to get so busy that we fail to really stop and just reflect on life. And some of us say, and I certainly believe, I'd certainly rather burn out than rust out, which some of us in this room may be in a danger of allowing to happen, just rusting out from a failure to really engage. What I'm convinced is most important is that we, wherever we are in life, at whatever stage of life that we're in, that we spend our time doing those things that have been led, that God has led us to accomplish, and to stay focused on that. Um, I'm reminded of a statement made by Paul in Acts chapter 13:36, and it's one of my favorite verses. In fact, I've chosen it as my life verse. For David, after he had served the purpose of God in his own generation, fell asleep and was laid among the fathers. I want to give you a little brief background on that verse. Paul and Barnabas were on their first missionary journey, taking the gospel to unreached peoples groups, Jewish people at that point. And their approach when they arrived in a new city was on the Sabbath to go to a synagogue and just share in that time together. And as was the custom, it happened when Paul and Timothy were there, that the head man in that synagogue asked Paul if he had something to say. And for Paul, that's like saying sick him to a dog, to give him an opportunity to say a few words. And he took advantage of the opportunity not just to bring a greeting, but to preach a sermon. And what he did was, again, give a history of Israel over the years, from their deliverance from their bondage in Egypt. And then he led up to the time where David was reigning as king over Israel. And it was then that Paul made this statement about David. He said, he raised up David to be their king, concerning whom he also testified and said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my heart, who will do all my will. From the offspring of this man, according to the promise, God has brought to Israel a Savior, Jesus. And then it was a few words later, a few sentences later, that Paul made the statement, for David, after he had served the purpose of God in his own generation, fell asleep and was laid among the fathers. In many ways, that verse has been my life verse, not just because of the name, but because it has been for many years the desire of my own heart, my prayer and my commitment to serve the purpose of God in my generation. And that's still my desire. It's still my commitment. And while I came here, I was a part of a much younger generation. After 30 years, I'm now one of the old people. Well, I look around. I'm not the oldest person in this room. There are some of you who have a few years on me, but there's no question about the fact that I'm in the final chapters of my life, and I want to make sure that I fulfill God's purpose for my life, and I trust that that's true with every one of us in this room, that regardless of where we are in this spiritual journey, however long we've been following Christ or how short the time, that our purpose is the same, and that is to serve the purpose of God. Not our own selfish plans or desire or ambitions, but to fulfill His plan for each of our lives. And I would suggest my role at Central here will change, but I'm no less committed to God's purpose for my life and this church. And I trust, I hope, and I actually pray that I'll be able to do that until I draw my last breath. I would love to die like the few who served God and then just fell asleep, died, didn't wake up in the morning at home. They woke up in heaven. And as Christians, we can retire from a job, we can change a career, but God never intended that we cease serving Him. And what I want to do in the next few moments is to just share my heart and to provide what I trust will be an encouragement to you, a reminder to all of us of God's plan. Let me give you a little bit of history. I've been involved in ministry for 45 years, and I know what some of you are thinking. Some of you younger people, you think, 45 years, and you're thinking, well, man, he must have started ministry when he was 12 or something. Those of you who are older know that's not the case. But I was young, not 12, but when I got started in ministry, I was 19 years old. At the end of my second year of college, I was hired part-time in a church in Seattle, West Seattle Christian Church, and I served as the youth pastor, very part-time while I was going to school. After that period of time, I served in a place called Beaverton. When I graduated from college, after 2 years, I moved to Beaverton, Oregon, where I served as a youth pastor for 3 years during the time that I was going to seminary. And those were great years. And then I received a call to move to the Seattle area, back to Seattle, to a church called Overlake Christian Church, and I served there for 10 years. And just had a great experience. And many of the things that I learned about ministry, I learned sort of in that setting there. I started as a youth pastor and then did adult ministries, and when I left, I was executive pastor overseeing staff and all of those kinds of things. And I'm convinced in each one of those situations, it was a God thing. It wasn't something that I chose to go from here to there to there. It was clearly God's leading in my life, and I'm convinced that He was in the process of using me, but also preparing me, and preparing me for the work that He wanted me to do here. And I don't think any of that was a mistake or just chance or anything. It was ordained by God. I want to explain just an interesting story in terms of how I got here to Central, because it was truly a God thing. While we were there in Seattle, I had begun to get this desire to pastor a church. And during that period of time, I got a phone call from one of the elders of the church in Beaverton, where I had been 10 years earlier. And they wanted me to come down and consider coming back there. And so I talked to a friend of ours, Ron Gallagher. Some of you remember Mildred. Ron is her son, and he had worked with us, and we were good friends there. And when we were going down, we wanted to leave the kids, so we asked Ron and Tamara if they would take care of Rhonda and Matthew while we were gone. And they said they would, and he said, "Are you going down there to try out at this church?" And I was caught so off guard. And I said, no, Ron, that's not what we're doing. I lied, is what I did. And I hate to admit that in front of God and everybody here. But I did. And we went down and talked to them. And I said the only basis on which I would come would be if the elders made the decision that I would be the next senior pastor after Don retired in a couple of years. And Don didn't feel comfortable with that, so they didn't do that. So I went back home, not concerned at all or upset, but I did feel guilty because I had lied to Ron. And so I told Ron, I said, Ron, I'm really sorry. You caught me so off guard asking the question, and I wasn't ready to disclose that. And I lied to you, so forgive me. But we're not moving there. Now you're wondering how this fits into here. It's an amazing thing, because at that period of time, Central was looking for a new lead pastor. And Les Foote, some of you may remember, who was an elder in this church and a dear friend of mine, Ron's father-in-law, he called Ron and said, "Do you think Dave would ever," because I'd met Les when he came up there, he said, "Do you think Dave would be open to a call to Central?" And he said, "Well, normally I'd say no, but I think he may be." And so they called, and we came down here. And I'm convinced that it was a God thing. God was orchestrating that in my life and was working long before I ever recognized, even before He placed the desire on my heart. And these last 30 years have been a blessed time. And I understand now how true it is that when you're having a good time, time really does fly. And that's been so true for us. Now, that's a rather long introduction, I know. But I had Myron put together just sort of a visual look through history. And it's not my history, it's the history of Central. So take a look at some of these little slides. some exciting times together. And I know that it's really just the beginning of our times together as a body. And I want to share some thoughts with the congregation and then several thoughts with Matt. And then he'll have an opportunity to share as well. But first, my thoughts for the church. I want to thank the elders of this church who really have been the anchor, the support, giving direction to this body. But they've not only supported the ministry, but also me in providing guidance, wisdom. The leadership of this body has always been a collaborative effort. It's of several guys, godly men, who love this church and whose lives are an example. And without them, this church would not be where it is today. I also want to thank Jerry Chaddock, who in the past few years has taken such a burden off of my shoulder in terms of the administrative kinds of things that I carried for many years, and that executive role has been very helpful to me, and I think a tremendous support for the staff and really the church. And you, Jerry, are very much appreciated and loved by me. As I said a moment ago, the leadership and direction of this church has always been a team effort. And that effort is not just, that leadership team is not just the elders, but certainly the staff, as I've mentioned, but it's more than that. We have some very committed men and women who have provided leadership for this body. We have a board of directors who have given oversight to the whole budget, the financial area, the facility and grounds, and all of that kind of thing. We have many small group leaders who really are disciplers, meeting with people in their homes. We have people who lead the men and women's ministries of the church that are so fruitful and productive. People who lead in worship. We've got people who are very gifted and are willing to use those gifts in worship. We got people who are involved in youth ministry, some very, very dedicated people. The children's ministry probably has more volunteers than any other department of the church. But there are people who volunteer in the office. There are people who work with the homeless ministry that itself is growing and expanding. People, honestly, who do maintenance on this facility. We've got men who are retired who have these skills. And when there's a need around here, they get a phone call, and those guys come over and give their time and use their skills. And it has been a tremendous help. And I share all of that to remind you all that this has been a partnership with all of these various groups of people who have enabled this church to accomplish what it has accomplished. And I say that because oftentimes I'm convinced in ministry, people like me or the other staff who are more visible get a lot of recognition saying, well, you know, look at the great job they're doing. And I remind myself frequently, I wanted to remind you that without faithful people like you, willing to use your time and energy and gifts, no church would ever be what it ought to be. And so I thank you, those who are serving. And those of you who are not yet serving, I want you to recognize that to the degree that you're not using your spiritual gifts, you're not using the talents that God has given to you to make a difference for the kingdom, you're wasting your life. Anything that you do in a career that doesn't somehow use not just the talents that God has given to you, but your spiritual gifts to make a difference, to that degree that you don't use what God's entrusted to you, this body is less than what it could and should be. It's not as effective as it might be if you get involved. And I hope that you'll consider doing that, get involved. And I know Matt will be encouraging you in that regard as well. And I want to ask that you give Matt and Wendy the same love and support that you've given Linda and me over the years. Ministry is not easy. I'm convinced it is a spiritual battle going on. In the midst of ministry, there is a spiritual battle. And that's not just true with guys in ministry, it's life of a Christian. But I believe it's especially true in ministry. And the challenges that pastors face are great, and I'm convinced that Satan really targets pastors because if he can bring them down, he has gained a great victory. And so I trust that you will pray for them, not just him, but them, that God will grant the wisdom and discernment and patience that they will certainly need to adjust. And theirs is a greater adjustment than mine. I came from, up in Seattle area to here. Matt and Wendy and the family came from Texas. Can you believe that? They lived in Texas and then coming to Southern California, and that's a cultural adjustment must be. But I know they're making that adjustment well, and I appreciate so much already Matt's leadership in the church, and does a great job teaching. And I know you'll support him as you have me as well. I want to share some thoughts with Matt and staff and elders as well. And I know I speak for the elders when I say that there's absolutely no question in our minds that God called Matt here, and I've said that. We went through a process that was led by God. I'm convinced of that. And many of you know that we kept you up to date. We had a consulting firm that helped us find some of these candidates, and we narrowed it down to 3. And then it was clear in the process of those 3 top candidates that Matt was the one who stood out. And we were convinced in our heart as elders, this is the man. And we spent time with him, and it became even more aware. We were more aware of the fact that Matt and his family, Wendy and the boys, were being called by God. And by the way, the response of the congregation in voting, the members of the church, of those people who voted, 98% agreed with us that Matt was to be the lead pastor of the church. And I just know that it was a God thing. Having said this, I know from experience, personal experience, and also from conversations with others, that there will be more than a few challenges that Matt and the elders and the staff will face in this time of transition. And really the transition from him and me stepping down is completed, really. As of this week, I suppose next week would be sort of the final, but that transition is over. And I will be gone for a period of time, which is a wise thing to remove any confusion in anybody's mind about who's the lead guy here. It was my idea. It is a good thing. And Linda and I look forward to that time where we can go visit other churches. And we'll do that every week, visit another church and have the opportunity to learn and grow through that. We have been blessed. And one of the things that has helped me in ministry is having a band of brothers. I have had for years an accountability group, 4 men at a period of time that I meet with twice a month for encouragement and accountability. They have freedom to ask me any question, to punch me in the chest if need be, and say, hey, bud, you got to lighten up or whatever, which actually one of the elders did for me years ago. Took me aside and did that very thing, punched me in the chest and said, hey, bud, you got to lighten up. And I took that. And all of us need that kind of accountability, men who will speak the truth to us. And Matt, I trust that you'll get a group of those men you trust, and you'll listen to, because it's very, very important for us. I want to now share some thoughts with all of us, but certainly Matt and the elders of the church, a couple things that I think we absolutely must do if we're going to fulfill God's purpose. And the first is to stay focused on the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. Stay focused on the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. Both of those, I'm convinced, are sort of cornerstones, major stones in a church, as it were, the foundation of a church if we're going to succeed. Let me talk first about the Great Commandment. I want you to listen to how Jesus answered a question from some people about what was the greatest commandment in the Bible. What's the greatest commandment ever given by God? And Jesus said this, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. And the reason I want us to be reminded of this, the greatest and most important of all of the commandments in the Bible, is because in ministry it's very easy to get focused on other things, things that are less important. Uh, and we need to stay focused on this personal, intimate, growing love relationship with Jesus Christ. That ought to be the first priority of all. Loving God with all of our heart, all of our being is focused on loving Him. And I'm convinced that it is that love relationship with Jesus as it grows and develops that enables us then to fulfill our love responsibilities with other people. All of us have people around us that are somewhat difficult people to love. Sometimes they're in our family, our neighbors, whatever. But we all have those people. And I'm convinced that it is our love for God, our love for Jesus Christ, and that increasing love, that continually increasing love for Him, that enables us then to love other people the way we should, because His love then is flowing through us, helping us to love. And I just absolutely know, without fear of contradiction, every one of us in this room have some of those difficult people to love. And it means that we need to stay focused on loving Him, and then He'll enable us to love through, He'll love through us and love other people. We have to keep focused on Him and the good things that He's working out in our lives. And that enables us then to have this, as I said a moment ago, this greater love for other people. Matt, what I'm saying, you were here last night. So anything I say to him, I already said to him, but I still have to say it because, you haven't heard it. But so Matt, I have, and I'm really not just saying it to him, but really to all of us. I have been around pastors all of my life, from my youngest years. My dad was a pastor. I had a couple uncles who were a pastor. I had a great uncle who was a pastor. I had my oldest brother, my only brother, oldest brother, was in ministry. I had a couple brother-in-laws who were in ministry, and many, many friends. I've been around them my entire life. And I believe with all of my heart that being called to ministry is one of the highest calls and the greatest privileges that any person can ever experience. And I'm convinced there are people who are in ministry that haven't been called, and as a result of that, they're not necessarily very fruitful. But I'm convinced that God has chosen me, and I know that's true with Matt as well. God had chosen him, set him apart, and I believe it has actually, in His sovereign plan, had from eternity past, knew that Matt was going to be here. God is sovereign in all of this, and as elders, we truly do believe that God was involved in this entire process. And I say to Matt and to myself, and really to all of us in ministry, that we have got to keep our focus on Jesus. It's so easy to get caught up in all of the details of life, to begin looking at the storms of life. You remember when Peter was walking on the water? Jesus asked him to come, and every time he looked down at the storms and took his eyes off of Jesus, he began to sink. And that's really what happens in our lives, in ministry and with our families, marriages, and these things. It's so crucial, so critical that we have that focus always on Jesus and His plan for our lives, and living the life that honors Him. And it is that focus, that love relationship with Jesus, that enables us to fulfill His purpose for our lives. And folks, I have known over the years more than a few pastors who have taken their eyes off of Jesus. And I have seen the results of that in their lives. They become ineffective. an unfruitful, usually pride takes over in their life, and when pride comes, it's followed by a fall. And those of you who've been around church for any length of time have no doubt seen a pastor, maybe a couple, who have taken their eyes off of Jesus and have had a great fall. I thank God regularly for His protection in my life, and I have prayed consistently for that. And I know that others have prayed for that. And I would encourage you, and I know some of you have prayed for me, and I would encourage you to pray for Matt and Wendy and the boys. This adjustment period of time is not going to be easy, but I know God is going to go with them and give them the grace and strength that they need. And you stay focused on the great commandment, loving God and loving people. And I know Matt will do the same thing. And those who have failed to do that experience a fall. Don't ever, Matt, allow yourself to get to the point that you think that could never happen to me. Thinking that is the beginning of the fall. The Bible says, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. And that's true with all of us in this room. Make your number one priority loving Jesus Christ. Let me suggest, secondly, not just Matt and elders, but all of us need to stay focused on the Great Commandment, but we also need to stay focused on the Great Commission. And we're familiar with these words, Matthew 28:18-20. Jesus himself said, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore and make disciples. Go make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded them, and lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. And the point I want to focus on in this Great Commission is go make disciples. That is the priority. That's the essence of this commandment, is making disciples of Jesus Christ, not just making converts. I'm convinced that many churches and many pastors and many leaders of churches oftentimes ignore this whole commandment and get busy with other kinds of things. But those who take it seriously somewhat without understanding the full intent of it think that the mission is making converts, getting people to embrace Jesus. And this whole commission that's a part of it, sharing Christ with people. But the objective is not merely to get people to pray a prayer and accept Christ and go through the step of baptism and then you just leave them alone. That's the first step in the process of disciple making. And so I'm convinced that as a church and as elders of a church, discipling people must be the mission. It's the commission, and that needs to be our mission, is to lead people to Christ and then invest in their lives. Encourage people like all of us in this room to get into a small group, maybe to get into an accountability group, or any kind of relationship that will enable you to grow deeper in your faith. My experience is, and I know it's true with some people in this room, that you came to Christ at a point in time. And maybe for a period of time you were growing as a disciple, becoming more and more like Jesus. But it's easy in the busyness of life to take our focus off of that objective to grow to become more like Christ, and we lose the discipline of just spending time with God on a regular basis. We get sloppy even about attending church. And we were at one time may have been in a small group that provided that encouragement and support, and then we bailed out of that because we got too busy. I'm convinced all of those things, relationships with people who will encourage us in a group, having some people who will come alongside and encourage and hold you accountable, spending time with God on a regular basis are absolutely essential ingredients in growing as a disciple. And as you and I are growing as disciples, then we're in a position to be able to help others to grow. And that's a part of discipling, is becoming one and then having an impact on the lives of other people. It's been one of my greatest joys in ministry and things that I have enjoyed the most is spending time. I almost always have had a discipleship group. I'm without one right now, but I will get a band of brothers again and begin this whole discipleship process of spending time with them, encouraging, holding them accountable. I'm sure Matt will do the same thing, and I would encourage those of you who are growing in your relationship, you're mature in the faith, that you too, if you're not leading a small group, at least find a band of people that you can invest your life in. Uh, that must be our mission. That must be our priority. Above and beyond everything else is obeying the Great Commandment, fulfilling the Great Commission. As a second thing, in terms of Matt and the leadership of this church, and that is to preach the word. By the way, I was gonna say one other thing. I just noticed it in my notes. God has given me the privilege over these years to be involved in pastors' conferences in Guatemala and El Salvador and Nicaragua, and then in the past few years, I've been going to South Africa with some guys who I discipled in junior high and high school, and now they're pastors, and we've been doing these pastors. They started with me and going to Central America, and I'll be going with Jeff and Bud. Bud's one of our missionaries in South Africa that we support, and they're in my youth group, and it is just so cool to be able to have this relationship with these guys that has gone on for all these years. And the reason I'm saying this for all of you and also Matt is because I really hope that you, Matt, will take over this part of, I think, the ministry. I know the ministry of this church. And that is discipling pastors in other parts of the world who don't have the advantage that we have here. Some of them, they don't have seminary training. Some of these guys get called into ministry, or at least they think they've gotten called into ministry, and probably have, but they don't have the training. And they look forward to these times with people from the States coming over. And Bud Diener, who is there as our representative, training these pastors on an ongoing basis. And I'm going in September. When I come back, I have promised my wife before I wasn't going to go back. This time I'm going to keep it. I'm not going to go back again. And so you'll have to take over. Now, the third thing, I don't want you to feel a burden or a load, Matt, with this whole thing. But if you don't do it, I don't know who's going to. So. So focus on the Great Commandment and the Great Commission, and this really is to Matt and to pastors, because our priority, and Matt's priority now, is preach the Word. Those of you who've been around Central for any length of time know that my dad was a pastor for many years. He died of leukemia probably 20 years ago or so. And although he lived in Oregon at the time, most of his ministry years was in Oregon. Even when he came down with leukemia, I would make trips up there, and we would have phone conversations on a regular basis, talking on the phone and communicating in that way. And I still remember the last phone conversation that I had with my dad. And among other things that he wanted to encourage me to do, the thing that was most heavy on his heart was, David, preach the Word. Don't ever stop preaching the Word. And that was, I appreciated that reminder. That had been the priority of my life and ministry, was just preaching the Word of God. And though he knew that's what he did, what I did, he still felt the need to just remind me of that. Don't ever stop doing that. And I think the reason he felt so passionate about that was any people who've been involved in ministry, people like yourself even who have attended churches, the focus really isn't always on preaching the Word. There are little sermonettes and ideas, and maybe taking a verse and then going off somewhere. But I'm convinced the health and growth of the church is dependent upon the pastor and the leaders of the church preaching and teaching the Word of God. There are those occasions where it's good to have a topical message. You're still preaching the Bible, but you're taking these verses and then and sharing on the topic of love or grace or something else. But I'm convinced that the healthy church is a church that is getting a steady diet of just expository preaching. And that's what we've done almost all the time. I've taken time to do topical messages, and I know Matt shares that same passion. He went to Dallas Seminary, and it's a good seminary, and they certainly talk about that as well. And I would encourage Matt, and I would encourage you to encourage Matt to just preach the word. A steady diet of God's word is what churches need. I'm reminded of Paul's advice to Timothy in 2 Timothy. And it was a charge to Timothy, but it's also a charge to every pastor. I solemnly charge you, Paul said, in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who is to judge the living and the dead, and by his appearing and kingdom, preach the word. Be ready in season and out of season. Reprove, rebuke, exhort with great patience and instruction. For the time will come, and I would suggest to you, friends, the time has come, when they will not endure sound doctrine. And there are many people today who do not have a desire for sound doctrine. They just want good, positive comments. Some of the largest churches in this country, Joel Osteen, holds up his Bible, says he's going to preach from it, and then he provides topical sermons, feel-good kind of sermons, ignoring completely. For the time will come, and that time has come, when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance with their own desire, and they will turn away their ears from the truth and will turn aside to myths. And so, Matt, I would encourage you to just preach the word. Those of us who have been set apart by God to teach the word, I'm convinced, have one of the most important responsibilities and the greatest privilege that can be given to any person, which explains why James communicates very clearly that it is those of us who are in ministry who will receive the stricter judgment. We have a high calling, and we need to be faithful to that, and God will bless us accordingly. I want to encourage you to also encourage the staff, Matt. Encourage and hold accountable as well, because all of us need that support, that encouragement from our leaders, not just you, Matt, but from the rest of the staff and elders, to just keep on keeping on. Be faithful in the ministry that God has given each of us to do. And there's a third thing, and that is to equip the saints. Equip the saints. And I'm just going to read Ephesians 4:11 to 16. Paul's advice. And he gave some as apostles, some as prophets, some as evangelists, some as pastors and teachers for the equipping of the saints, for the work of service, to the building up of the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and to the knowledge of the Son of God, to a mature man. That's the objective, to mature men and women, to the measure of the stature which belongs to the fullness of Christ. As a result, we're no longer to be children. That's us. We are no longer children, tossed here and there about by waves and tossed by waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by craftiness and deceitful scheming. But speaking of the truth in love, we're to grow up in all aspects into Him who is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body, being fitted and held together by that which every joint supplies, according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love. That is a crucially important passage that pastors, staff, elders, and really all of us who are involved in any ministry with other people, this equipping kind of ministry, what we're learning we impart to other people. We come alongside. That's the role of pastors and elders. But others have that privilege as well. And I would encourage you to Matt and the elders to be faithful, and all of us as possible to be engaged in that. I want to take a moment and pray. God, I thank you for this time, and I ask, God, that these words that have been spoken might have been prompted by your Spirit, and it might plant seeds in the hearts of all of us in this room, that we would love you with all of our heart, and we would be concerned about the lost, and be engaged in doing our part to be a witness to others, and that you will use this church to be a bright light in this community and around the world as well through our missionaries, I pray. And I pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen. One of the things that we decided as elders to do, and Matt, I want to ask you if you'd come on up here. We wanted, and we heard about this in another church, to pass on a little baton. I never was in track, but my legs were much too short. I remind people, however, I did play 2 years of college basketball, and that always gets a laugh out of them. But I really did do that in that very, very small college, when they either took me or they had to play the girls, and they didn't want to do that. So, but this baton, and this is symbolic of what really is happening anyway. But we thought it would be a good thing. And on this, it says, fulfill the great, obey the great commandment, fulfill the great commission, equip the saints, preach the word. Just what we've been talking about today. And so I want you to put this someplace where you'll see it and be reminded of the priority. And then I want you to give this man the encouragement and support you have given me all these years. Bless you. God bless you. Okay.
So you'd think after hearing that a second time that you would kind of emotionally be a little bit easier for you. But thank you, Dave. And you guys have been extremely blessed to have a faithful minister of the gospel. And it is incredibly humbling for me. And as we enter this time of communion, as the ushers come forward, I invite you, we're going to sing Nothing But the Blood of Jesus, which really has been a cornerstone of Dave's ministries. He's focused us, helped us to keep our eyes on Jesus. And I pray that that's the thing that inspires us, that pushes us on as we go forward, that, times change and seasons will change as well. And each generation, you've got to pass on a baton. But God's kingdom remains the same. Our charge to love God with all that we are, to share the gospel and make disciples, to preach the word and to hold on to that, and to equip the saints for the work of ministry, is what we have to continue to do. And as long as we continue to do that, our light shines bright, and our best years are always going to be the ones that are ahead as we look forward to that time when Jesus comes. And so now we're going to sing, like I said, Nothing But the Blood of Jesus.